Hello and welcome to another In Conversation with WLV Doctoral College. I'm Dr. Deborah Curitan and I work in research and development at the University of Wolverhampton. As you can see, again, I'm not with Ben, but I'm here with Greg, who is one of our PhD students. So Greg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Greg Marshall. I was a part-time researcher in performing arts, and I was doing my PhD on digital culture and how it informed live theatre and performance. Specifically, I was looking in the end at how gaming theory from video games, gaming theory aided and supported the analysis of live theatre and performance, and could perhaps be used in a utilitarian manner to aid the development of future productions.
That's brilliant and very interesting subject area.
That's normally where people fall asleep.
No, it is really interesting, and I don't just say that. Now, the reason why you're here chatting with me today is because you've been through Viva Voce, and you're going to talk a little bit about that process. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you found the Viva Voce?
Mine was a sort of slightly extended piece of business, because I not only went through one, but I had the bonus of going through a second one. My whole view of this sort of in retrospect is that it's actually a bit of a process rather than being an individual activity, and I can't really see it as anything else. The very first thing which I was thrown into, and I said, look, I really want to practice at this first before we do it, was the mock Viva, and it turns out I was heroically bad at that. While I thought I was perhaps hitting the mark 50% of the time, they felt I was hitting the mark maybe 5% of the time, if that. I was just so appallingly unprepared. Never having done a Viva, of course, yeah. I would be unprepared. This is my line about this the whole time. If I knew how to do a PhD, I would have one already. While it was a rather disturbing process going through the mock Viva, ultimately what it did was show me that I needed to prepare properly, pull my finger out, listen to the supervisors, and work out exactly what it was I needed to say, how to say it, and how to retain that information in my head so that I could juggle around with it and manipulate it when I needed it. So that was the mock Viva. We've got questions, I think, about how to prepare for it afterwards, but by the time I came to the first Viva, I was actually pretty well prepared for it, and I got a bit of a tough going over by the external examiner. It turned out my topic was tangential to his pet subject, on which he'd written 2 books. And wasn't going to let a thing go by, and so we drilled down and drilled down and drilled down, and eventually came out with the conclusion that it was major changes and structural changes as well, which resulted in a second Viva. That was sometime later, a year later, but the second Viva was actually a lot more interesting because it was only on the things that I changed, which was a very specific subset which I could prepare on, and it really could only be responded to in terms of those particular changes that I'd made. It was still a tough going over, and I believe the word grilling was used by the chairperson, which I didn't think it should have been. However, that's how it was, and it was a preparation that actually got me through that.
So, was there anything in the Viva Voce that you didn't expect, or was different to your expectation?
Well, that's where the preparation comes in, and the mock Viva. Everything in the mock Viva was outside my expectation. everything. By the time I'd gone through the preparation with the supervisors, who did a marvellous job of just calming down, settling down, focusing on what the relevant questioning was likely to be, and they were spot on. We got 50% of the questions we'd prepared for directly raised. So we're pretty good on that preparation. There wasn't very much I wasn't expecting, and because of my own rehearsal and preparation, I was actually far better organised in my head to be able to respond standing on my feet.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about preparing. You've talked about the Viva Voce and how that's a really important part of that process. And you're not the only person to kind of go through a Viva Voce and say, oh, crikey, I didn't answer any of those questions. It's the experience of most of us. But is there any other advice that you would give to students about their preparation for Viva?
Yes, yeah. So there was the main criticisms that were levelled at me during the mock Viva, and really how I built up from that was that I had a real tendency to send myself off on a tangent down some rabbit hole where I was totally boxed in and couldn't dig my way out. And that was the biggest thing, where I knew I can't get out of this. What am I going to do? Fortunately, after I'd done my preparation, I didn't actually get myself into that situation in the end. It was something I learned how to avoid. The structure of the responses also, keep them short.
Yeah.
Beginning, middle, end. Keep it short, summarise at the end, make it less than 2 minutes max. If you're going to make any response to a question, they can follow on with extra questions if they need stuff. So it was really listening to the question. If I had, so say something I was thinking about just before in response to this was where do we sit in terms of the post-digital being a theoretical model position that we're in. So I said, well, this is what we refer to as post-digital, giving a statement of what it was referred to as, who referred it to it as. So I used evidence to support that, saying where it sat with my work, because this is about my work, and always go back to your work. Don't talk about their stuff. It's your work which is the main focus of this. Use evidence to support what you've said. So in my work, while this might look like the post-digital, it's actually a moving target because technology is always moving on. And so post-digital is always referring to something in the past, not to something in the future. So there is no such thing as the post-digital in my argument, and use evidence to support that. Beginning, middle, end, summarise, finish it off. So be quite short and clear about those responses, and that was actually pretty straightforward once I'd done the prep. Had all these theorists in my head, had all the evidence in my head, and had all my work in my head that I could just draw on. What other advice? Yeah, so once we got these questions, the sort of standard 10, 12 questions to sort of work on, I built my responses, got them nice and short, tested them with the supervisor, and then I really learned them, so that if there was any particular jargon in there that I might get myself tripped up over or forget, then I just learned them. Now that might seem I'm going to give a rote response, but I never got asked that question in that way, so I had to refer to that stuff that I'd learned, and that was what I did for myself. You know, that's my own background, that's how I had to do it for myself, but it meant that I had enough material in my head to respond standing on my feet. I thought having notes around would be helpful, having post-it notes on all the pages of the PhD, and oh, but if you go to page 176, you're going to find that. Didn't help at all. Couldn't use them at all. I maybe looked at one framework structure just to have an idea of a wording. That was perhaps all I ever used. Yeah, was I anxious? The second time round, I started off actually really quite anxious, and I was garbling my words and not really speaking up clearly and able to answer. And so I thought, hold on, just take a breath. It was online, but I took a breath, sat back, looked at my notes, wrote down the question again to give myself a bit more time, and then just took a deep breath and went into it a little more steadily. Just talking a bit more slowly, a bit more steadily, thinking about what I was going to say. Yes, I was anxious. I was more anxious sort of in the build up to it. But once I got into the stride, it's all about my work, not about them. So anything ever, any time I had any uncertainty, I just started talking about the work itself again in response to the question.
So you've talked about it being an online Viva. How did you feel about that? Was it an easy thing to handle? Was it difficult? Did you feel okay with it being online?
Yeah, absolutely no problem at all. What you do have to take care of is, possibly as you found, sometimes if you're using technology, you need to make sure that you've got it tested beforehand. You make sure everything's working. And also, if there's any chance that it's going to drop or fail or do something, have some form of backup approach. In fact, I was fine. The external examiner's kit went offline halfway through, and it took him some minutes to get back. But no, absolutely no problem. And I think one of the things we've found over the last couple of years during lockdown is we've all got a lot more used to the application of technology as a communication device like this.
That's brilliant, thank you. So I'm just going to ask you to summarise with some tips. What 3 tips would you give to students who are about to go to Viva Voce?
Well, first tip: make sure you've done your prep. Make sure you have those standard questions lined up for yourself that you are pretty certain are going to be asked. You get some sort of standard ones, which are why did you start this particular PhD? Tell us a little bit about your background. They never asked me about that. But they might do some sort of more straightforward generic ones, and then you're going to get some specific ones, which are the standout questions about your material. And so there are going to be some really big, obvious questions which anybody who reads your thesis are going to say, I want to know a bit more about that. That needs to be explained more. And for me, my supervisors really did a great job of saying, they're going to ask about this, they're going to ask about this. And this was particularly pertinent as well, doing the major corrections, which I had to go through, which I think is a common experience. I mean, I think the majority of people actually get major corrections, but don't necessarily have to go through a second Viva, as I did, especially. I have said throughout the whole of this process, if I knew how to do a PhD, I'd have one already. It's sort of bewildering, you know, you sort of half expected to know all of the stuff that you're supposed to do with this. And yet by the end of it, I just sort of look back and think, what was I thinking? Really? I had no idea really what I was getting into. I'm not an academic. I started as a mature student. I was doing this part-time. I had all sorts of other things going on. While I was very enthusiastic to start with, of course, what I started out with as an opening idea totally changed.
Yeah.
And it was actually only in the last 2 or 3 years of a very long 10-year period that I actually got to grips with how it was going to finally shape and structure. And in the end, the difficult part was sort of making those changes. It did, in the end, make it a better thesis. Yeah. I resented it. The supervisors probably resented having to go through it. The examiners probably resented having to go through it. It wasn't a pleasant post-Viva experience, but I think that's true now I've been through it for most people. Yeah. But you don't see that in the How to Survive Your Viva book. It just gets up to the point at which you're doing your Viva. The big thing that I never really got to grips with until far too late, well, not too late, it was later than it should have been, and this is particular to arts really, is the methodology. And arts in particular can sometimes lack structure in their methodological approach. And if there's one wish I knew more about earlier on, it was what the methodology I was going to ultimately use was going to be. So for arts, if you're out there, look at grounded theory, really useful for arts approach. But that was a tricky one for me. Get your methodology down early.
That's brilliant, thank you. So it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you, and there's loads of really good advice there, stuff that I think it's useful to hear from another postgraduate researcher. It's okay me saying this sort of stuff, but to actually hear it from somebody else located within their experience, it's really useful. So thank you for sharing that experience with us. We really appreciate it. So as always, it's wonderful talking to you all. If you've got any ideas of what you'd like us to cover in these vlogs, do let us know. Do put them in the comments below. Whilst you're there, do press subscribe and follow us, and also press the bell so that you know when we upload our next video. We upload mainly every Friday, and I look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you, Greg, for joining us. It's been lovely talking to you too. Bye, everyone.